Hello, it's Dave Waddington here, and welcome to this NSF webinar on remote auditing. For those listening in who I've met before, it's great to talk again. And for those who I've not met before, here's a brief summary of some information about myself. Suffice to say, we're living in a rapidly changing and challenging world. And in line with the NSF mission of protecting and improving human health, the team here at NSF are working hard at developing a series of webinars that we hope you will find informative and helpful through these really difficult times. And here's a selection of some of the subjects that we're hoping to develop and publish over the coming weeks. So a key question is, what can we do to keep our pharmaceutical supply chains in operation? And this is equally valid for existing products as well as it is for materials to support forthcoming clinical trials. And how can we do this whilst keeping the balance of regulatory compliance and patient safety at the forefront of our minds? So we've developed a four-step process to allow for remote audits. And here's a flavour for the tool that we've developed. And I will run through each of these steps in a little bit more detail. The process begins with a risk-based assessment, and we then move on to, if we successfully move beyond the risk-based assessment, a remote PQS assessment, which is then followed by a remote audit, and then at some time in the future to an on-site audit. So looking first of all at step one, what could a risk-based assessment involve? And this is really important. It is genuinely a risk-based assessment. So here we are posing a sort of series of questions, looking for a set of information that will allow us to make an informed decision as to whether we're happy to proceed with a remote audit, or actually whether it's best not to continue with maybe the supply of materials for a forthcoming trial, or even question our ability to extend a existing supplier's certification. So in this risk-based assessment phase, we're really pulling upon information that's available to us, such as what is the regulatory oversight of the facility we're interested in? Do they have appropriate licenses and registrations that are up to date? And do they cover the scope of the material or the product that we're interested in? What is the inspection history of the facility? When were the last inspections and what were the outcomes? Do we have knowledge of any recalls or any restrictions that have been placed on the site? And thinking about the site and the relationship with its maybe a parent company, is it part of a larger organisation? Does it operate to a common PQS? And is there a corporate oversight of the facility that we're interested in? And quite importantly, what activities is the site performing for us? So is it simply providing an excipient, an active, partial manufacture, or total manufacture, and the QC elements that are associated with that? And alongside that, what are the cross-contamination risks that we're concerned about? So what other products, what other materials are manufactured at the site, and how concerned are we about those? Now, in terms of carrying out this risk-based assessment, it really is driven by the nature of the materials or the products that the site is going to be producing for us. So is it simply an excipient or an active? Is it a dose form? And if it's a dose form, is it aseptically prepared, or is it a sterile product? Is it an ATMP or a biologic? And obviously there's different risks associated with each of these materials that we've got to consider. And also the stage of development. Is the product in the R&D phase, early phase clinical, late stage clinical, or a commercial product? And the risk-based approach that we are championing here is collate the information. You may have other areas you want to add in here, and then carefully evaluate the risk to see whether you actually feel it's appropriate and your local regulatory authorities will indeed let you move on to a remote assessment. So moving on to some of the things we could consider as part of the remote PQS assessment, and this is step 2 of our process. And this is really a remote review where we can request information from the site and then we can review that information, very similar to the way we'd review it during an audit process at the facility. So on the left-hand side there in blue, we have some of the sort of key high-level documents, such as Site Master File, which gives us a good overview of the facility. Management Review may tell us a little bit more about the culture of the organisation, running through to training, data integrity and audits. And here what we're asking is for a site that we're considering for a remote assessment to provide us with that information, and we will look at these master policies and procedures. In the middle there in orange, we have a whole series of the key PQS elements that we would want to look over. And in the right, there's some other elements more related perhaps to the individual material or products that we might be interested in. And again, this is a remote review of master documentation that we're interested in. Moving on to the remote audit process itself. So it's all well and good looking at master documentation, but what we want to look at is evidence of implementation and particular control. And ideally here we want to talk with the subject matter experts for each of those areas we're looking at. And I guess this is an interesting challenge. So typically, if you're auditing a facility, you would be sat across the desk from a person, a subject matter expert, or you'd be in the facility talking to them. So we envisage this step of a remote auditing process to be very similar to that process, whereby you could arrange individual sessions with those subject matter experts, and you could then look at example information. Say, for example, if you're looking at investigations, you may be looking at example complaints, example deviations, laboratory out of specifications, which you could have reviewed remotely, and then to have any questions and talk in detail with those subject matter experts. And here's typical examples of some of the documents we may be looking at to try and gain evidence of the appropriate level of implementation and control. So minutes of management review meetings, PQRs, investigation reports, adherence to schedules, individual training records, and maybe some executed batch records that we'd be interested in looking at. Moving on from this stage, making an assumption that the remote assessment is satisfactory, and we really have to be careful with that remote assessment that we don't extend the audit period for days and days and days above and beyond what we would normally take auditing the facility. So we've got to be quite focused in terms of how we're going to go through that step 3 assessment. And we may even introduce using video technology and having remote views of the facility itself. If we deem that the facility is suitable, then we could go for an interim approval, but there may be some mitigation that we want to introduce. So we may decide that as we haven't actually been to the facility, we may want to increase the level of scrutiny or oversight on materials that we're receiving via maybe additional sampling or testing, or applying additional QA oversight to the facility, where we may want to review part or total batch documentation. We may even want to see deviation reports, investigation reports, information from key quality attributes of the process itself. So there may be extra mitigation we want to put in place, bearing in mind we haven't had the opportunity to actually visit the site itself. Later on, and this could be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months after we have successfully carried out the remote audit, if we then follow up with an on-site audit, this of course can be of reduced duration. So maybe typically a day and a half to 2 days. And this would then be very much focused on those elements of the facility we didn't have the opportunity to see. So looking at a general facility review, looking at that product material specific information and the contamination control that goes with that. Maybe looking at the utilities. We're very much interested here in seeing the facility itself, walking through the areas and talking to individuals who are performing operations, which gives us an opportunity to look at site culture and how the site is managed and operated. And of course, it gives us that opportunity now to pick up maybe CAPA follow-up or some of those items from the remote assessment that we couldn't look at in detail from the original remote review. So that's an overview of the process that we have developed, and we've developed a toolkit around that. And if you're interested in finding more information, then please do contact us. Please do stay in touch with NSF through our Pharma app, which you can download free of charge. And as we're running through these challenges that are currently facing us, we'll be publishing more and more information on the app and links to useful webinars and resources for you to use. So thank you very much for listening to this short webinar and for taking an interest in this subject. If you have any questions or want to receive more information about the toolkit that we've developed, then please do email in to pharmamail@nsf.org. And if, of course, you find these webinars useful, then please dial in to future webinars that we're presenting. Thank you very much for your time, and stay safe, everybody.